And now we'll talk about the evolution of tabletop games. And most people are familiar with the really old-time games, some of which have been played for centuries, such as chess, checkers, Go, tic-tac-toe, backgammon, and so forth. Most of these games are perfect information and there's no chance, so that it's possible to calculate the best move. And in practice, they're actually puzzles, and some of them, like tic-tac-toe, have been solved, so we know that tic-tac-toe is always a draw when played perfectly. In commercial terms, we then came to traditional family games: Monopoly, Sorry, Game of Life, Scrabble, many others. In most of those games, there's sufficient randomness to give the young people in the family a chance to win, because they're supposed to be played by a family. And they have mass market simplicity. There were some mass market games that were not family games, for example, American Heritage Broadsides and its sidekicks, and Risk and Axis and Allies. And those sort of led to hobby games. Hobby games date from the 60s, Avalon Hill War Games, and later from SPI and S&T Magazine. These games were more complex and required a lot more skill. But they were thought-based, not physical skills. You had to outthink your opponent. In a sense, they were chess-like, but there was randomness as well. And many of them were based on historical events and were asymmetric, with non-equal starting sides rather than symmetric as those old classic games. Most of them were for 2 players. There were some for more than 2 players, which is called multiplayer in the tabletop side, but many of them involve player elimination, just as Risk does. Along about 1973-4 saw the introduction of role-playing games. Dungeons & Dragons was the first commercial success. There was a role-playing game designed before Dungeons & Dragons, but it was not a commercial product. In role-playing games, players have individual avatars, usually a person, and they are persistent. You continue to play that avatar through many sessions. And there is a referee, so they were very, very different from board games or card games. Video games, in fact, owe a great deal to Dungeons & Dragons. The computer tries to replace the referee, but many computer games and computer game genres derive more or less directly from D&D. And of course, the other thing that set role-playing games apart was book-length rules. You needed the referee for interpretations. And in the video side, of course, the computer takes care of all the rules. These games can be very story-based and highly immersive. It's not necessarily so, but it can be. And 30 years later, D&D is still the big dog. Then we had the phenomenon of collectible card games. Magic the Gathering was extraordinarily popular and is to this day. Collectible games more or less required you to buy additional randomly configured sets of cards so that you could get better cards, so that you could make better decks and have a better chance of winning the game. And so people bought millions of cards, and shop owners would say, Magic paid for my house, because they could sell everything that they got, and it was not cheap. Since then, we have a few competitors like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh!, but few of them have been successful over time. And nowadays, a new CCG has virtually no chance to succeed, because people have become suspicious of collectible games as a way of publishers grabbing their money. There are some collectibles that have not been cards that have prospered. For example, HeroClix, although even in that case the company nearly went bankrupt and has made a comeback. In board and card games, we had the rise of Euro-style games. games of that your board and card games are much more popular in Germany than in USA. And in Germany, the games are much more cerebral than the USA mass market games. They are not just kids stuff. They are still family games on steroids, and there are still catch-up mechanisms so that Junior has some chance to win. And many of them you can more or less not pay attention for half the game and still have a chance to win because they derive from that family game tradition. There are others that have outgrown that, and if you don't pay attention for the first half of the game, you don't have much chance. Also in Germany, war games were frowned upon by the shop owners who could remember more or less World War II and its after effects. And so board and card war games didn't get shelf space. Now video games is a different distribution, and video war games sell just as well in Germany as anywhere else. Euro-style games tended to eliminate overt competition and de-emphasize winning. There was no player elimination. There was a reduction of overt randomness, and many people who play these kinds of games just do not like to have dice involved, unless the dice are used in a way that equally affects all the players rather than just affecting one or two. Sometimes the games have so little interaction between the players that they're called multiplayer solitaire. And they become puzzles as much as games. And of course that varies. There are thousands of games that are called Euro-style games, and many of the most well-known ones do not adhere to the typical parameters of the genre, which may be one reason why they're some of the most popular. Recently we've seen the toy factor grow greatly in games. The graphics and visuals become more and more important. It's almost like people are more interested in what the game looks like than in how it plays. Some players see games as toy boxes, and here's a quote from someone: "Tannhäuser is like many of my favorite games in that it is not so much a game as it is a box of toys with rules." The cult of the new is also very strong. Perhaps people get tired of the look of the games, and since they aren't all that much to play, they go on to other games. So it is often the case that a new game is played once or twice or 3 times and then set aside for another game. In some ways, this is like a reversion to mass market family styles, where good gameplay is not important in the purchasing decisions of the buyers.